So, thank you, Sarah. If you could stay here, if I could ask Kian, Sarah, and Daniel to come to the stage. Um, we are running a little bit late, but we'll be literally eating away from your lunchtime. But I think it's important to take some questions from the audience and keep the discussion going. So we'll have about 10 minutes for questions. We have two microphones here, so if you have a question, please raise your hand and I can... Oh, you're standing there, that's good too.
That was a really wonderful set of presentations. My question is for Kian. I was really interested in your statement that we should be looking at the processes of urban design as an object of research. And I was wondering if you have any thoughts about how you link that to the outcomes and how you integrate, or whether you should integrate, a normative lens when looking at those processes and practices.
Thanks for the question. I think, yes, I think there is a normative lens. I think if you think back to what Anastasia had given us in her presentation yesterday, I think planning and urban design, if we consider it as a part of a normative planning, would, I think, take on some of those principles. And I think the question is, what is normative urban design? And there, I feel that we owe ourselves more attention to design as a research object. And I don't think we have it yet. I think what we have had over the last few years are disagreements, contestation, a lot of rhetoric between different fields of, or different styles, if one may say, of urban design. So you have constant conversations between, let's say, new urbanists and landscape urbanism proponents that argue often about normative values of form. And I think we have to transcend that to look at what really we are researching when we're researching design. So let's say if you were, and I'll try to keep this brief, depending on what research framework you come with in your worldview of knowledge claims, how is design as a practice, a process, and an outcome, how does that feed back into the research frameworks that we understand from the disciplines we come from? And I think that has not been well discussed and understood.
Hi, I'm just following up on the previous question. I thought those were great presentations. I thought they were put together really well, and I liked a lot the visuals. I guess my question is about your experience incorporating the research findings, your tools, your visuals, in how we make planning and design decisions at the municipal level in civic governance now, and whether you see ways and examples that we can do that better, or if you think that it already is being done to a sufficient degree. I'm coming from the perspective of a municipal planner and thinking, this is great. I don't know how we do this in the city that I work in and how we can do that better. So just wondering if you have any recommendations or examples through your own work, or if you think the way that we're doing it now is sufficient to affect change in how we make these decisions at the local level. Thank you.
That's a good question. I actually probably should talk to you to learn more about your domain, because that's actually the challenge precisely that I'm dealing with, is I have no idea what state-of-the-art practices are in planning. But I will say that based on my sort of initial survey, it seems to me that like a lot of the work right now is being done based on simulation techniques produced in the 1970s. So what we're essentially dealing with is generic rules of thumbs for solar axis laws, and not really a huge attempt to calibrate solar rights axis. Just as an example, more precisely calibrate it using recent development in computational tools. I will also add that the energy standards are a huge part of this. So the material data that I used for Cactus is based on the ASHRAE 90.1 energy standards, which is very similar to the energy standards we use in Canada. And it speaks to a bit about energy reduction in architecture, that the energy reduction verification essentially is isolated to building envelope optimization and the mechanical systems optimization, but not the geometry, which means we don't really have the same formal and economic incentives for developers to create compact geometry that saves energy that we do for building envelope and mechanical optimization. It doesn't exist in the performance verification. So that is another huge issue, and it speaks to the kind of way in which architects have outsourced energy reduction to specialists rather than deal with it at a typological level. Thank you.
Hi. First of all, I'd like to thank you for the presentations. I work in the architectural industry, more on the practical side of things. So this discussion, even from yesterday, has been very enriching. I have a combination of just statements and questions. The first one to Kian. You mentioned that we should perhaps start looking more carefully into the relationship of urban design or form and emotions. And I think that's a wonderful thesis. Even in architecture, design professionals should venture not only to design places and building structures or environments that serve social, cultural, and environmental objectives, but also to produce meaningful spaces, meaningful cities, meaningful environments. So that one was a statement. To Daniel, I think absolutely, working in the design industry, your invitation to utilize 3D technology to provide the public with better visualization of form and space, not only in stormwater management, but as Sarah mentioned, in all the different aspects of architectural design and urban design. Sarah, when you mentioned about what I took away from your presentation was perhaps an invitation to revisit our notion of suburban and urban. I agree with you. Not everybody wants to live in a 10-story or a 30-story condominium building. I think and when you say when you mention these numbers, figures that relate to future population and density concentrating in urban centers, you're absolutely right. When we talk about urban centers today, they are now starting to include suburban areas, and I think we should revisit how we look at the definition of urban and suburban, and how perhaps we can put these two seemingly contradictory environments together. And then lastly, which is the question to Saran, is Cactus able to model urban form in a situation where there's already existing form, for example? I think you presented the software's ability to model low carbon impact of a let's say a new block or a greenfield, if you will, but within let's say an existing built environment. Is the program able to, let's say, model an infill or an addition to that block or to that space in order to slowly or maybe perhaps incrementally achieve low carbon objectives? Thank you.
Yes, it is, although I'm not sure if you will get the kind of energy savings in that context that justify optimizing by geometry. I think once you get to infill development, the geometry impact is much less because you're limited in your ability to coordinate the different geometries together. Yes, I guess. Yeah, the infill development is slightly more complex, and I actually think once we can do that, the optimization of mechanical systems and envelopes makes perfect sense.
There are two more short questions, hopefully. Hopefully we can also get two short answers.
Try and keep this to be a short question. Thank you very much for the presentations, all very thought-provoking. I had a question for Daniel, and looking at the idea of visualizations as a way of reaching out to the public. And could you comment on balancing the tension between providing provocative images like the Mile High Tower with not undermining the distrust that the public sometimes have in these artistic renderings?
I think the tower obviously is more, that's why I specifically said that, for a research purpose for the architecture office. So I think we need to be very cautious to publish these kinds of experimentation visualizations, which are actually trying to generate research or thinking processes, while I think we should be really looking at visualizations. That's why I thought to show the three types, where I was focusing on landscape, or the landscape on architecture, and then focusing on architecture, just to show you how powerful focusing on the different parts that could be. And if we then tune the scale of the buildings in those images to human scale, which they are not, and this is what I'm advocating, maybe in this case we should look back at Italy and look at their scale of buildings. For me, when the building goes above 8, 9 stories, it's definitely not human anymore, because it's very difficult to actually to function. There's this rule: when you forget your key and the guy on the 9th floor throws the key down, you should be able to understand him on the ground floor. If that doesn't happen, then I think the building is not at a human scale. So for me, the visualizations is also to really make clear that it is important to be careful what goes out to the public. And I think visualization can be realistic. That's why I showed the diagrammatic, the realistic, and the sort of collage ones, the artistic. It just needs to be clear for what purpose it is. And I think then I think it is appropriate to use. But I think we as designers need to be much more careful before we take them out. But actually, it's a very powerful tool, I think.
Question. Thank you for your presentation. I really like the Jakarta images where you used a lot of indigenous thinking, and I would like to ask all of you how we can incorporate that more. I was just in a project in Calgary, and one of the Blackfoot elders actually walked out of the conference room because he said it reminded him so much of residential school. So that was a really learning moment. We all actually left the room and found some things to make him comfortable. But I think it's really important. Someone mentioned colonial. And I've been on planning and design panels as a political person for 10 years. Very much colonial type of, where if even someone brings up First Nations or how to incorporate First Nations, you get a lot of size around the table. And, I find on the political sense, it's seen as over there. We'll put that thinking over there. And someone mentioned 70s in terms of design. I think 70s is even in terms of thinking in some of these municipal design panels and advisory planning commissions. So I'd just like to hear from all of you what your thoughts are on that. Thanks.
I think my approach for that has been to go out to the community and actually get into the community and talk to people on the street. And it's interesting, when I did that, in qualitative research, it's difficult to kind of get at the ideas you're trying to find. You have to have these longer conversations, but I think it's worth the time. I'm one researcher in the field putting in a lot of hours, but if you think about the amount of money and time putting into these urban design panels, it's actually not that much to just send someone out and actually talk to people in their environment. I found that when you're in the field, people point to things, they remember things a lot better. You can use visualizations as well to kind of mimic this type of environment, but just getting out there and putting the effort into sending students or researchers out to find out what people like and what people value and what brings up their emotion. Before you start a design process, I think you'd have a lot more impact and save a lot of money in the later stages when you've got the community banging at your door with their pitchforks against a tower. I think if you brought in some of the stories earlier, you would have a lot more success.
I'll just add a quick note about Jakarta. You said indigenous, right, in your question? So I would say that in that case, it was not so much a matter of indigenous design or non-indigenous, although in Jakarta there's certainly a clear colonial and post-colonial spatial, political, and technological legacy from 300 years of Dutch colonialism. But what I think is more important is when you look to the activists' work in producing alternative visions, they're working from social relationships on the ground. So more important than perhaps a vision or a symbol, which I think actually the Dutch landscape architects have harnessed here in trying to put forth the image of the Garuda, this eagle, which is a Javanese symbol. But that we look beyond the political ramifications of using symbology and try to really understand where images are coming from and how they are actually attaining power and convincing people.
Can I say one last comment? I think our designers need to understand that there's a huge disconnect between us and the public, and I think we need to start listening much more. And I think the visualization tools, the great thing about visualization is, we say in German, paper is patient. As long as it's on paper and nothing is damaged, it's actually a really good tool for discussion. And on the First Nations, I would say, maybe it's appropriate in the future that all these people should be in these kinds of discussions we have right here. They should be invited, as well as, like I said before, the mayors and all the people who are not designers, but who actually make the decisions in the end of the day, with the designers, obviously. Thank you.
All right. Thank the four of you for fantastic presentations, and hopefully we can keep the conversations going. Let's take a 10-minute break and come back here at 10:35 or 11:35 for the next set of 4 presentations.